All right, welcome to the Transfer Talks podcast. It's your co-host Ashman with co-host Neil. Super special guest today, Sebastian, who's a transfer to Stanford. He also got into Ivies and all the UCs. Incredible. So we'll be hearing from him. So, Neil, would you like to get it started?
Yeah, so Sebastian, if you, I don't know if you've watched a couple of our interviews, but we love to start these off by just kind of letting the speaker just give their thoughts on their whole process. So from whenever you feel like you started to whenever you feel like the process ended, give us like the rough like rundown of your experience transferring.
Yeah, so the transfer application process, the way I treated it is that even though most schools they ask for this essay and some don't, I wanted to like kind of draft my personal statement during the summer before the application cycle. So that way I had like ample time to then work on my supplemental essays during winter break because as you all will find out, it's very difficult to write essays while you're in school and whatnot, and especially when you have to reflect and put a lot of time into them. And so I think as a result, like taking advantage of those breaks in the transfer process, I think helped a lot. I think what was very difficult was not having a lot of resources because even though some of the essays were similar to like what freshmen had when they applied, some of the prompts I remember for like Yale and Princeton were very different from what they would usually have. And so I think not having an idea of where to start made that process difficult, but being able to go through all that and have good results, I think really helped. And at the end of the day, having just a few people look over your stuff is really what helped me in my transfer journey. So that way my message didn't get washed down. And so that's why I think I had such a good outcome and whatnot.
hmm Yeah, so when you started community college, what was your how did you kind of get your application or let me like rephrase this. What were some of like your biggest strengths when going into the process? What did you feel made you like stand out in respective to other transfers?
Gotcha. I think having long-term research is what helped me stand out because because my community college, the like closest local universities or 4 years was like UCI or Chapman, I believe, and UCR. So I decided to reach out to professors like at UCI. And even though they usually prioritize their students, one lab was able to give me a shot and whatnot. And on top of that, it wasn't just like a random research thing. It was something related to my major and also my interest in medicine. And so I think that made that process very meaningful. And since I did 2 summer research internships as well, I feel like having that background really helps because a lot of the schools I applied to are very research heavy. And so I think that was one of my biggest strengths because unfortunately it is hard to get research experience as a community college student, but it's definitely not possible, like it's definitely not impossible at the same time. So that's what I would say regarding strengths.
Yeah. Me and Neil, we've also done research, but like, what is one way you can show impact through research?
Hmm. Good question. What I would say is at the end of the day, the way you describe your research experience is going to play a huge part. And impact can take on the form of, let's say, you decided to do a conference and maybe you win an award, or maybe you decide to do a publication. All that stuff, though, can be very difficult. So just aiming for a conference, I think, is a great way to show impact because if you're able to share your results with the scientific community in an effective way, then I think that right there is a huge win. And so, and also if you're passionate about the research and you're able to maybe let's say you're given a data set, you have to do a review, but then you decide to do like a side project or a personal project. If your PI lets you, then that's another way to stand out because now you have your own autonomy over your own research study.
Mm. And were you able to get any publications through your research before applying?
Before applying, I did have one publication, and that was from like a 6 month temporary like wet lab research thing I did. That was semi-related to my major, but like also a very much organic chemistry version of it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And like, do you have any recommendations for conferences for like maybe undergraduates or like community college students that they could present their research at?
Yes, absolutely. So for community college students, at least I know just for California, there's the UCI HTCC conference. It's like the Honors Transfer Consortium Council, I believe. That one's a great way to present your research and whatnot. And another one, this one is a bit harder to get into, but it's still possible, of course. It's the Honors Bay Area Symposium. and they alternate between Stanford and Berkeley in terms of location each year. And now I think they're doing Davis for next year. And so that's a great way to do it's not a poster, but rather like a formal presentation. And so that's another interesting way to showcase your research. And then in terms of other conferences, that's going to depend on your lab, or like if you do a summer internship. Like I remember we had already designated symposiums for our cohort, like, oh, we were going to present at this building in Columbia Medical Irving, like Irving Center and whatnot. And so that's completely dependent on your PI, or if you're doing a summer internship, you usually are guaranteed to present at a conference at the end of it.
Hmm. Yeah, the Bay Area Research Symposium is really good. Um, if you're in a California community college, you can apply, I believe, as long as you're in their honors program, they let you apply to that. So that's also a really big thing. I wanted to kind of move on to kind of like standardized testing. So for the UCs, they do not consider it at all. But if you are aiming to shoot for privates or those tiers above, um, having that like SAT is kind of like from what I hear is not necessary, but a really strong thing to have. In your words, did you take the SAT, and how vital do you think it is in terms of applying to those other top schools?
So I did take the SAT, but it was in high school, and the score I got was not within a range that I would have felt confident applying with. And so when I was going to retake it, that's like exactly when COVID happened. And so I just never got the chance to retake it. So even though I took the SAT, I didn't report my score on my application. So none of the schools I applied to saw it.
Oh, great, great. And then in terms of like GPA, what if you don't mind sharing, what GPA did you achieve in community college, and what are your thoughts on sort of kids who are coming into community college with a really bad high school GPA, or like one that isn't like good enough for like top schools? Would you recommend them sort of taking 2 years or sticking to like 1 year?
Okay. Yeah. So in high school, I had a 4.0 unweighted GPA. And then for weighted, it was like a 4.6, I believe. And then in community college, I had a 4.0 unweighted GPA. And so what I would say is the biggest thing is that honestly, these colleges are not really going to care what your grades are in high school. However, you should show an upward trend. If you, let's say, did really bad in high school and you do worse in community college, or any college for that matter, that could raise a red flag. So as long as you're able to grow and have a, like I said, like an increased trend, then I think you'll be completely fine. And it doesn't matter how many years that takes. I think preferably I always recommend staying at community college for 2 years to really get the most of your experience and whatnot. Because if you think about it, by the time you go into your first year, and let's say you were to apply, then you already have to start thinking about, applying. And in my opinion, I think that makes that difficult to write a solid application. I think that may be easier for people at four-year universities because maybe something happened that it's easier for them to establish a reason to transfer. But I usually recommend staying 2 years, I would say.
Yeah. And there's definitely a lot of resources at community college. So like could you go over like maybe some resources you took advantage of your community college like honor program or research or whatever?
Yeah, of course. So I was a part of my school's honors program, and I think it wasn't like fully fleshed out because I was the only person that ever presented research because nobody really like did much. So it was just me, which was at the same time good because I was close with the honors advisor and she would be very supportive with my endeavors. And then I was also part of PTK, which is like the academic honors society. And I think that was good with getting like, some like serving the community around me and also just being able to apply to certain scholarships. And then being a part of my school student government as well. And I think that allowed me to not just impact my school's campus, but also like go to conferences related to student government outside, which I thought was super fun. And so at the same time, like that's kind of like the most I could have done at my community college. And so that's when I started outsourcing to like research, for example, because usually at community colleges, professors do not do research. And so that's what I would also recommend going into this process. Like, don't completely do like external extracurriculars because they're going to wonder why you barely did anything at your community college. So you have to have like a healthy mixture of both, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And a lot of professors at your community college would be open to doing like research projects with you. I know some of mine are like really open to that. Another thing I wanted to ask was like coming into community college, were you like aiming for these really top schools, or was it kind of like the UCs and like these were just like external reaches?
Yeah, when I came into community college, I was aiming for those top schools. Like I already had a list in mind of what I wanted
Mhm.
to do, even though I knew it was going to be even harder than it was in undergrad with like a lot of these schools. It was something that I think the way I treated this process differently this time is that I really just focused on like as very repetitive as it sounds, I really just focused on what I loved and, not caring as much about like, joining a bunch of different clubs. Because I feel like in high school, people they oversaturate their resume with just a bunch of random clubs. That's usually a mixture of NHS, Key Club, FBLA, DACA. And especially if somebody doesn't really have an interest or wants to major in something related to that, then that can kind of weaken your application. And the same thing applies for community college. You should really be mindful of the theme and how you want to sell yourself to these admissions officers. So that's why it's important to kind of establish that early, especially with some of these private schools.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of go back to when we were talking about GPA. You mentioned that you had a pretty strong GPA in high school, which
Mhm.
leads me to ask why decide to go to community college in general? I mean, like with like a unweighted 4.6, I'd assume you would get into like either like a pretty decent school. Was there like something that you just didn't get into school you wanted, or any other like specific reason?
Yeah, good question. I get that question asked a lot when I was at community college, but I did go through the application process in high school and I did have good outcomes. However, when I saw like the financial aid, it just was not great. And so even though like my parents and I, we could maybe make it by, it's not worth the stress to have to feel like we need to pay that. And so that's when I made for at the time the tough decision to choose community college. And the reason why it was tough is because unfortunately, like I went to a high school where just like it was very much stigmatized and I'm going to admit I was part of the problem as well. I would, make fun of community college. I was like, oh yeah, you're gonna end up at community college, blah, blah, blah. So I was a part of the problem. And I think it was the environment I was around. But so that's why those like 3 months, I didn't really tell anybody where I was going because I felt embarrassed. But then I realized it was one of the best decisions I ever made. So that's what I really emphasize to people. No matter if you have a 2.5 GPA or a 4.0, community college really is for everybody. And I think that allowed me to get honestly unique experiences that, in a way, I think sometimes a four-year university may not have been able to give me. And plus, like the setting is just so much more intimate with the professors. Of course, that maybe varies by community college, but that's why I chose to apply regardless of what my background was.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that resonates with me a lot. I think like all of us being like California high school students,
Yeah,
we know firsthand how bad like and how competitive and toxic this whole high school like to college like admissions process can be. And I do
absolutely.
think like what you said is really true. I believe that like community college, it can really allow you to flourish, kind of take some time to kind of think about who you are, what you want to do. I know lots of people who went in not even knowing what they were like destined or passionate about and coming out like going to Columbia, going to U Chicago, Stanford for all of these like really prestigious schools with more of a clear mindset.
Mhm.
Um, and then especially on that, I believe I do get a real you do get to be really like intimate and close with your professors. You get to really ask them a lot of questions. My professor that's I'm an econ major right now,
Mhm.
and my professor actually went to Princeton and MIT, and I talk to him every like week about sort of like his life and how he sort of like navigated like the economics world, getting his PhD
Wow,
and stuff.
that's
So
amazing.
yeah, I know it's like really great. And I think I would definitely not have gotten that if he was teaching at like Berkeley and there's like 100 other students. So it's definitely like
Yep.
a really big plus. So when you were going to community college, did you mentioned how you wanted like to have a sort of like theme? For me, I'm economics, Arshmit is data science. And could you kind of elaborate a little bit more on like kind of going why people should not kind of do these extracurriculars that have no importance to them?
Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of a tricky situation because at the same time, I don't want people to feel like, oh, you need to go into community college like already having a plan. But personally, like me, I just like planning stuff ahead of time. It's also because I'm paranoid. And plus, I know that since these schools already have like, single digit acceptance rates, I preferably wanted to dedicate my time towards stuff I knew was going to be long term ahead of time. So, what I will say for people that don't know what they want to do, start getting involved in things as soon as possible. It could be a wide range of activities. And then from there, narrow down in your interests. And if you don't, let's say, have like an interest related to your major, maybe you're just really passionate about a very niche form of community service, or maybe you have a passion about teaching people, if you're like a TA or something. And so I think those could also be themes as well. But if you go into community college knowing what you want to do, then I would highly recommend you form your application kind of around those interests. So for me, even though I'm pre-med, I didn't want to theme my application around being pre-med because that's something that's very typical. So instead, I themed it around sustainability or mental health. And the reason why I say or is because I based my themes based off of the application questions, and some of them were maybe better for like more sustainability, and the other ones were maybe more for mental health. And I would still incorporate both at the same time, but like one would be more prominent over the other. And so I would make that clear either through the extracurriculars I did or hobbies or essays, and of course with my major or minor that I wanted to do. And so I think having that clear path gave confidence to the admissions officers that, okay, he definitely knows he wants to do this. Because at the end of the day, like, yes, it's helpful to be well-rounded, but you have to be specialized, preferably in some area, because they don't want the best well-rounded student. They want a well-rounded student body. They want the best mathematicians. They want the best psychology majors. That's really what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think finding a niche is super important, especially for those top schools. I mean, like, they've already admitted like the future investment bankers are like doctors. So now you kind of
Yeah.
like, as a transfer student, I think another transfer said it really well. You have to have like demonstrated potential as a transfer, whereas like a first year just needs like potential. You need to figure out like what is like new and how you can kind of contribute to that space, and sort of just portray that in your application. So, another thing that leads me to ask another question on kind of like extracurriculars. Now, I do mention that I know that you talked about how you had a very solid ECs in terms of like corroborating a really good theme, but was there like one EC you focused on like the most, and could you kind of elaborate on that?
Good question. I think honestly, my top two, because I feel like I split my time, was being involved in student government and working at a clinical psychology lab at UCI. And I think both of those were important because in student government, even though my like major interests have nothing to do with student government itself, I was the director of sustainability. And because of my passion, I was able to showcase and do sustainability related events. And I think that's what also helped stand out because I wasn't just doing like a random position that really had nothing to do with my interests. And so I think I dedicated a lot of time to student government because that was something I really enjoyed, and especially being able to share my interests with the community. And then working at a lab at a university was a very special experience because initially I was very nervous, especially my first day in person, because I didn't know anybody and everybody knew each other. But over time, it just became a great little community we had. And it was good for me to know research ahead of time before going into some of these more advanced research spaces like over the summer. And so I think those two I dedicated usually around like 8 to 10 hours a week, I would say, for both. So those two were my most, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Emailing around. Like, would you say like there's like a proper way to like cold email for research positions?
Yeah, I when I emailed, the documents I attached was like my resume and transcript. Those were two things I would usually attach, and then I would say like, good evening, hello, X, Y, and Z doctor or whatever. And then I would talk about my interests, their interests, and why we match and why I think I would be a good fit for the lab. And so that kind of it's helpful to do a deep dive on the labs you're applying to. And of course, if you're applying to a lot, that may take a lot of time, but it's definitely something that's possible. And so I think incorporating that and just showing how what you can contribute to the lab, I think will help a lot. And so I made it clear that yes, even though I didn't have a formal research background. I told them, I'm willing to learn. I have this passion and adjacent interests, in other activities. And so now I just want to do it in a research setting. So that's what I would say with regards to cold emailing.
Yeah. And there are definitely a lot of like parts to an application like ECs, GPA, letters of rec. Like what would you
Yeah.
say like the most important part if there is one?
Hmm. For transfers, for high school, I would definitely say essays. For transfers, I would say it's a mixture of essays and extracurriculars because, I mean, at the same time, also GPA because of just how competitive it is. If we're talking about private schools, I'm still going to say essays, but your extracurriculars and grades have to be up there, in my opinion, to have the best shot or just have a very good upward trend with throughout community college. But yeah, I would say those were the most because essays, that's where you differentiate from everybody else at the end of the
Mhm.
day. Because yeah, you may have unique extracurriculars, but some people may have done adjacent things as well. And so at the end of the day, it's really not about what you write, it's about how you write it. And so being able to portray that is going to be a special ability that will resonate with a lot of the admissions officers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think with Stanford, like all of them, all the competitive applicants will have 4.0s and like research done. But like as you said, like kind of just like this, like differentiating yourself is like the only way you can do that is through your essays.
Yeah.
So to talk about a little bit, talk a little bit about letter of recs. I do know that the privates require like 2 to 3. Um, how did you kind of go about getting those letter of recs? How did you, when you asked, did you like give them any material or talk to them about a theme you wanted to kind of like be shown through the letter? Just like walk us through kind of that kind of process for you.
Yeah, sure. So I knew I was going to ask 4 people because for some schools, like the max people I could, well, for some schools, the max you could add was like 6 people, but I thought that was crazy. So the reason why I did 4 is because each of these people were able to showcase a different part of my personality and my work. 2 of them is the academic professors. Now, the way I approach this, everybody kind of does this differently, but I recommend, especially if you're pre-med, to get a science professor and then a humanities professor to write you a letter. And honestly, this kind of goes for everybody because that way it showcases like 2 different ways of thinking, 2 different sides of, the education spectrum, essentially. And so I asked my cell and molecular bio professor and my philosophy professor, both completely 2 different things. And so, but because I was close to the professors in both settings and contributed to the work greatly, I made sure to tell them like I would love if you could highlight some of the times I went above and beyond in your class, some of the special things I did, like what you think made me stand out. And so they were able to talk about me in an academic setting. And then for my third person, I wanted somebody to talk more about my leadership. So I asked my student government advisor. And I didn't really need to prepare too many materials for honestly any of my recommenders. They kind of knew, like they had an idea what to do. I just told them, like, emphasize leadership, emphasize academics. And then for my fourth person, I asked my PI at Columbia to give me a letter of rec because she was able to talk about a lot of my research and how that connects to my interest in medicine. And so I think at the end of the day, it is quality over quantity. But the reason why I did 4 is because some schools they gave me the option, and 2, each of those people were able to talk about a different part of my application.
Yeah, I 100% think like having like humanities and science is really just important, but also like people who know you like the best. I mean, for me, right?
Yeah.
Even though like I'm econ major, I'm planning to ask like my art history teacher because I think she's like experienced me kind of struggle with a new topic, but she's also seen me like grow and get better and improve and like succeed in the class. I think that's a big part of my that's a big part of my application and something I want to really show. So I do think like just taking some time and thinking about who is like right to ask is important.
Mhm. Absolutely. And to quickly add on to that, I like I also at the time when I was a psychology major, I didn't ask a psych professor at all. So like
Mhm.
kind of similar to what you were saying, Neil, like everybody just don't feel pressured to like get somebody within your major. And at the same time, don't try and like force a relationship between a humanities and a
Mhm.
science professor that you're not close with, but you're just trying to do it to get both. I know some transfers that had two archaeology professors, give them a letter of rec within their major, even though it was basically two for this same like, department. And they were able to have good outcomes. So at the end of the day, it really is also who you know best, and who you and what your relationship is with them as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about like essays, like for transfers, like would you say it's like different from first year and like the way that you like approach it and like talk about yourself?
Yeah, I think the personal statement is really what's different because, for one, it's not standardized in the sense where you write an essay and it gets submitted to all the schools. Rather, some schools they have like a slightly altered version of it, but the main version you'll get is like, what are your reasons for transferring the objectives you hope to achieve? I feel like this essay, it's less like of that narrative storytelling, like it's a bit more straightforward. However, I still recommend like the way I approach it was like for the first third of my essay, I made it a bit of a story and then segueing into like, okay, now this is why I need to transfer, even though I'm grateful for my experience at community college and receiving a terminal degree. And then regarding the supplemental essays, they're not hugely different from freshmen. The prompts though may be different, I will say that, but the strategies kind of remain the same regarding like showcasing your personality, show don't tell, being reflective and showing growth throughout your essays. So it's uh it's special towards transfers, but also not completely different, but still difficult at times, especially with resources.
Hmm. Yeah, and I was wondering if you kind of like provide some of the colleges that you were actually like accepted to when applying as for a second time.
Yeah, sure. When I applied, okay, I applied to like 16 schools, so I'm gonna try and remember. Okay, so it was Stanford, Columbia, UPenn, Northwestern, Vanderbilt, UCLA, UCI, Johns Hopkins, Tufts, and I think that's all. And then waitlisted at Yale and Swarthmore. And I think those were my outcomes. Yeah.
So yeah, like when I kind of hear that, I always hear like a couple like students who just like went above and beyond, kind of hit a lot of these top schools. And I think what I've seen historically is that a lot of if you get a 4.0 and you have like decent extracurriculars, you're bound to get like a UCLA or a Berkeley. But the kids who
Absolutely.
kind of like go a little bit higher, um, there's a lot less of them. There's like a big gap from like that Berkeley, UCLA, Michigan to kind of Yale, Stanford, Princeton. Uh, what do you think kind of like makes these applicants a lot more successful, or what do you think they kind of like do differently in your opinion to kind of hit those schools that are above?
Yeah. I think the one thing that also comes down to is that the UCs prioritize a little different things than some private schools. Like they're very more like heavy on statistics and whatnot, meaning like your grades are a bit more important, your standardized testing. Well, for us transfers, that's not the case. So, and they want a very straightforward approach, even with the essays. But with the private schools, I think really what makes the difference is kind of I think is having a very tighter and more cohesive application, really in terms of your theme. And like, yes, you maybe like having like great extracurriculars, not just like good ones that really go above and beyond, let's say, maybe what a normal community college student would do. And so I think, especially if you're able to do the same stuff at, let's say, somebody that goes to a university, that's something that could also be seen as very impressive because, you've taken advantage of your resources at your community college, but you also went outside of that to do something else beyond that. And so that's what I think is the biggest thing as well. And of course, also comes down to essays. Since the UCs, they take a more straightforward approach. It's kind of a skill that's can be difficult, but learning that storytelling narrative type of writing, but also in a way that isn't just fluff, is really what stands out with the private schools. And also, not having a unique like perspective. Of course, don't force uniqueness. Like, don't write some essay about why pizza is a metaphor for your life, or something like that. But just, something that's meaningful. Just don't try and force uniqueness. Just write what you want to write about at the end of the day, and just be mindful of how you put that in your different essays.
Yeah, yeah. final question is like if you could go back and like if there's one thing you wish you knew, like what would it be before starting your community college journey?
Hmm. I think one thing I wish I knew is that I wish I was like just came in with a mindset more open-minded. Like I wish I was less harsh on myself. Like and knew that I was going to be more confident coming out of community college than ever because I really struggled with that. And so I think if I wish I knew that mindset earlier, even in high school, I think, I would be able to set boundaries much easier, not just with myself, but with people in general. And so community college, I think, really helped establish that. It was like a huge, I feel like, maturing period. And maybe it's because, you're around a very diverse student body, especially in terms of age groups, but that's what I think I wish I would have came into early in before community college and whatnot.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we could that's like kind of the beauty of it, like I think community college, like we said earlier, it allows you to kind of like sit with yourself, like you don't have like the same people you were with, especially if you went to a competitive high school, like
Yeah.
around just all that like chatter. It's just you, yourself, and it kind of like lets you reflect, kind of understand like what do you want to do, and then just go and gives you the opportunity to go and do it. So yeah,
Mm.
100%. I think community college, like when I first started, I hated it. I thought like I just wanted to transfer as fast as possible, but now I'm kind of like seeing the benefits of just going. But yeah, thank you so much, Sebastian, for coming on. I definitely learned something in terms of like writing and how to like navigate through the space. I'm pretty sure Ashmit did as well. I'm not too
Yeah,
sure about that though.
no, no,
But
no,
yeah,
I learned a lot. Thank you
but
so
yeah,
much for coming on. I'm sure our viewers will really find this insightful and valuable.
Yeah, of course. I'm really honored you guys wanted to speak with me. And I can also confidently say that even though I'm at Stanford, I do miss community college sometimes,
hmm
So no matter really taking those years at community college as much as possible, because trust me, there's a lot of good in it. And so just, make the most of it and be grateful.
hmm All right. Thank you so much, Sebastian.
Of
We'll talk
course.
soon. Bye. Mhm.